you for the chance to talk to you. I hope that you can bear to kind of carry on that focus through this last session, and then we'll be through to an opportunity to ask questions at the end. I've been asked to talk to you because as a local authority in the last just under a year, we've got some sustainable drainage supplementary planning guidance adopted. So we've been very much thinking about what opportunities the planning system provides to maximise the benefits of SuDS, and kind of part of the thinking process of how we've gone about that as a local authority. I work for Central Bedfordshire Council. We're a unitary authority, so we've got the benefit of having both the local planning authority and the lead local flood authority in one place. My role is promoting green infrastructure through planning policy, through development decisions and through planning obligations. So day to day I work quite closely with the planning team, and really the background to our work is we saw SuDS as a way to deliver multifunctional green infrastructure, and we had that background of joint working with planning colleagues. So hopefully what I'll be able to talk you through today will be useful if you're a local planning authority, if you work for a local planning authority or a lead local flood authority. Just an example of the way that another local authority has gone about doing this, what the thinking process is for those in the development community, the consultant community, just how kind of the way that local authorities are approaching this. And just really to provide an example of how you can develop a sustainable drainage guidance specifically as a statutory planning document. So that's an overview of what I'll be talking through, and then finishing with some thoughts on the latest announcements from government and what the challenges and opportunities from those are. So just to give you an introduction really, this isn't the corporate spiel why Central Bedfordshire is amazing. It's really for you to understand kind of where we're coming from, and actually the physical location is quite important in terms of where we're coming from as a concept. Central Bedfordshire's located, we've got Bedford to the north, we've got Luton to the south, Milton Keynes and Aylesbury to the west, and Cambridge and Stevenage to the east. It's a largely rural area with a mix of large towns and market towns, but it's very much within the sphere of influence of those surrounding towns and cities. And there's a lot of pressure for growth and development. For instance, Luton and Milton Keynes are among the top 10 fastest growing towns in the United Kingdom. So that growth context is really important in understanding our approach to SuDS and how and why we've gone about the approach that we have. Within Central Bedfordshire, we're planning to deliver another 31,000 new homes by 2031. Just to put that into context, that's about a quarter increase on top of our existing population, or another town the size of St Albans. So it's a substantial pressure for growth on what's largely a rural area. We are within those, we're covered by 4 housing market areas: Bedford, Stevenage, Luton and Milton Keynes, and that's the way that local planning authorities do have to plan for their growth and demonstrate that they're delivering enough growth to meet the needs within those housing market areas. So that's the pressure on Central Bedfordshire. In terms of what our vision is, our local politicians don't just want Central Bedfordshire to be defined by its neighbours and to become a dormitory for its neighbours. Our politicians, and I think this is really important, we've got to get politicians on board with SuDS. We've got to understand where they're coming from and kind of what levers we can pull to help them understand what the benefits are of SuDS. So for us, our local politicians are thinking about they don't just want to be dominated by our neighbours. Central Bedfordshire wants to become a place in its own right rather than just a dormitory town. They accept the need for growth, but they want it to be sustainable and with a sense of local identity. So the vision is very much for sustainable quality growth, and within that there's a great opportunity for us to show how SuDS can be part of that jigsaw in terms of delivering development that's fit for purpose in terms of its location, in terms of its design and in terms of its sense of place. Also, it's important to understand the drainage context in thinking about where we've come from. This map shows surface water flood risk across Central Bedfordshire. So yes, it is an issue. There's about 9% of our housing stock and 34% of business premises are located within areas that are susceptible to surface water flooding. It's a factor, but I'd be lying if I said it was the main factor. We're not an area that's had major high-profile incidents of flooding. So it's a consideration, but also at the other end of the scale, water's a consideration. Central Bedfordshire is part of the East of England region. It's water stressed. The region as a whole receives 50% less than the national average. So promoting infiltration and groundwater recharge is really important. So that's kind of where we're coming from in terms of our drainage context. Yes, we need to think about surface water flooding, but we also need to think about sustainable use of water. And within the growth context, we need to think about what other benefits it can deliver to provide that package of sustainable, locally relevant growth that our politicians are looking for. So kind of understanding where we're coming from, I hope, has helped in terms of getting you to understand what our vision is for SuDS. And what we're really keen to do is to think about what the opportunities are from SuDS. So we don't want water to be seen as a problem that has to be engineered away, but we want it to be seen as an asset that can be exploited through positive design. We don't want drainage systems that just manage water. We want to think about the range of benefits that they can deliver. And we don't just want a one-size-fits-all design. I think we've all come across that in terms of the housing market being dominated by major providers. There's such a tendency to get homogeneous solutions, but what we're looking for in Central Bedfordshire and what we'll get through the planning committees, because what they're looking for is developments that are relevant to the local area and that complement local character. So that's our vision for SuDS. That's what we want them to achieve. So we've had a lot of thinking about the amount of guidance that's out there. So I think you do have to think, why develop guidance? What is the benefit for you as a local area in having guidance? What do you want it to cover? What do you not want it to cover? What will it deliver for you as a local area? So I guess what our thinking was, and we've come across this time and time again, is to get good quality SuDS that are cost effective and that are multifunctional. You've got to get them planned in from the start. So one of the important roles that we saw for having guidance is actually just having something to say, we as a local authority think this issue is important and we've developed specific statutory guidance on it. It raises the profile, it gets people aware of it, and it gets people to think, okay, this organisation is serious about sustainable drainage and we do need to think about it at an appropriate stage. We also wanted to develop guidance because within the local authority we had several roles. We had our planning role, we had the lead local flood authority role, and we were planning to take on the SuDS approval body role as well. So I guess that there's a benefit of having those three roles sat within one organisation, but also we recognised that we needed to be consistent as an organisation. So the opportunity to develop guidance actually gave us the chance to get our own house in order, make sure that that communication was there between the different areas of the organisation, and make sure that we were providing developers with a clear and a consistent message. And that's really what we wanted to get across in terms of the holistic approach to SuDS design. We've got a fairly well-established system within Central Bedfordshire of pre-application advice, and we charge developers for that. What we didn't want them to do is to come to the ecologist and get one answer, to come to the landscape consultants and get another, to be talking to highways teams and getting another answer. We needed to make sure that if we were going to charge for pre-application advice, it needed to be helpful and it needed to be consistent. So again, an opportunity to get our own house in order and to get the thinking done about how we as a whole organisation would consider SuDS and would advocate it to developers. So that's why we went about it. I think it's a really fair comment to make that actually there's a lot of guidance out there. What we were wanting to do with our guidance is to make sure that it complemented existing pieces of information and that it was locally specific. So we didn't want to go duplicating the national standards. We didn't want to go telling people how they could design swells. You're completely right, that information is out there. What we wanted to make sure is to say, this isn't guidance about how to design SuDS, this is guidance about what we as a local authority expect from you as the development community in terms of what we're looking for, and these are the processes that we expect you to go through and the approach that we're expecting you to take. So it's very much tailored to what's specific to us as Central Bedfordshire. Everything else, we can refer to it, we can signpost it, we can even specify that it needs to be looked at. But we wanted to make sure that what we were doing was relevant to us as a local area. So having made the decision to go about putting together this guidance, I just want to quickly talk you through it. 4 main sections within the guidance, nothing, I guess, very earth-shattering in its innovation here, but sorry, the guidance was fantastic, but the structure isn't earth-shattering, I should say. One of Mike's colleagues did a fantastic job for us in supporting us through the process. So, yeah, SuDS isn't rocket science, the approach isn't rocket science. What we included was the context in terms of the legislative context, national policy, local policy, and also the environmental context, what's specific to Central Bedfordshire. The second chapter was an overview of the approval and the adoption process, and that's the section with a bit of a question mark over it at the moment. We're going to have to update that when we find out exactly what happens from government. But equally, the principles remain. What we included in that section is what we expect at the different stages of the approval process. So what information we expect at a pre-application stage, what information we expect at an outline stage, what information we expect at the detailed application stage. Okay, it's not going to be going to the SAB for evaluation, but the principles of the type of information you expect at each stage are very much the same. So yeah, we need to do some tweaking, but there aren't going to be any major rethinks there. And then the 2 sections that I want to look together with you in a bit more detail, design considerations and local requirements. So they're the things that we're looking for specifically for the local area, and then designing for local nuance, really thinking about the character of the local environment and how you can respond to that with SuDS design. So this is jumping straight through to chapter 3, which is the section on local requirements. The whole of the guidance document is adopted as statutory planning guidance. It's a supplementary planning document, but I guess this section is particularly relevant in terms of statutory weight. It includes those 10 local requirements. And the way we went about doing that was saying, within our existing local development frameworks, we've got various environmental policies that are fairly generic in terms of climate change mitigation and adaptation, green infrastructure and ecological enhancements, managing water quality and flood risk, landscape character, open spaces. So the type of policies that probably all of the local planning authorities will have in their development strategies. But what we did with the SuDS guidance is say, okay, we've got those adopted policies, but what do they mean specifically in the context of SuDS design? So it's not introducing new policy requirements, it's just unpacking those existing policy requirements in the context of the specific design challenge of SuDS. And you can see what we've pulled out there in terms of the policies. So they're kind of the positive, they're what we'd like to see in your approach to SuDS. But we live in a real world, and we've also got to deal with maybe addressing the other end of the spectrum in terms of challenging negative assumptions and approaches. And I think this is a common challenge that everyone has had in putting together guidance. Oh, we can't do SuDS here because. So what we wanted to do is to just do a bit of myth busting for all the common things that you hear developers say. We can't do it because it's in a floodplain. We can't do it because it's upstream or downstream of a surface water flood risk area. We can't do it, etc., etc., etc. So we've just gone through the standard things that you'd get in terms of reasons why you can't do SuDS here, and said these are examples of best practice. If you design it right, if you design it at the right scale, at the right stage, actually, yes, you can. So kind of the flip side of this is what we want to see from SuDS, and also challenging some of the negative assumptions of maybe why developers might consider SuDS more challenging, but also how they could be overcome. The last chapter of the guidance is really where we kind of dig down into the local context of Central Bedfordshire. Central Bedfordshire, geographically it's a relatively small area, but there's quite a lot going on in terms of landscape character. So to the north of the county, you've got a clay vale, then it comes up into a green sand ridge with the Ivor Valley and alluvial gravels coming through it. Then you're back down into another clay vale, then you're up again into the Chilterns chalklands. So actually it's quite complicated in terms of its geology, its topography, and the landscapes of Central Bedfordshire are very much linked closely to those things that are going to affect surface water and how you'd manage those. There's also a link between the landscapes and how SuDS are managed. So just taking one example, the southern chalklands in the southern tip of Central Bedfordshire. Much of that area is part of the Chilterns area of outstanding natural beauty, and there's several SSSIs in that area. So as well as designing sods to fit that context in landscape terms, it's also, you've got to think about, okay, chalk streams, if they're part of the ecology, how can you design sods to protect surface water, to protect groundwater through your infiltration? So just thinking about, okay, well, what are going to be the design opportunities, what are going to be the design challenges in those areas, and how do we expect sods to be designed to respond to those different contexts? So I think that's really the heart of what we were trying to get to with the guidance, is making sure that it's locally relevant and making sure that developers really do have to think about the context that they're designing in, to think about, well, what are the things that the sods system needs to deliver within those areas. So that's just a really quick run through of the guidance, of how we've gone about doing it, kind of what the backstory is and what it provides. So just kind of in summary, what does it provide? We didn't want it to be prescriptive. We wanted it to really set the tone in terms of what we were expecting. So it includes design principles. We wanted it to be a positive approach to planning for sods. We did really want to make sure that it was specific to our local area, that it wasn't duplicating stuff that was already out there, but it was looking at our local growth context and our local environmental context. We really wanted to major on the multifunctional benefits of sods. Like I said, surface water management is an issue for our area, but it's an issue among a whole package of others we needed to be delivering against. So we want to think about how those sods can deliver public health benefits, open space benefits, biodiversity benefits, landscape benefits, that whole host of things that we know sods can provide if you design them right. And I guess what we were doing was we were seeing government faffing in terms of the implementation of the Flood and Water Management Act and thinking, okay, we're kind of planning for this, but what mechanisms do we already have as a local authority that we can use to get this started? Which is why I think we went down the road of, okay, well, we're already a planning authority, we've got powers as that, how can we use those to say, well, a lot of sods is going to be delivered through development, how can we maximise our role as a local planning authority? And kind of try and be a bit ahead of the curve, I suppose, in terms of we can't just be waiting and waiting and waiting for the next announcement. Let's think about what we can do now. So I guess that's a route that we're quite pleased that we went down in terms of the direction that government has taken, but equally we did adopt it in April last year, and there are things that we're going to need to think about once the new guidance is finalised. But I think it gives us a really good basis in terms of thinking about what we as a planning authority expect from development and how we can go about it. So just finishing with some quick reflections, a lot of things have been covered by other speakers, and yeah, I think a lot of people's thinking are the same. In terms of the government announcements and how they sat with us as a unitary authority, in terms of sods as part of the planning process, I guess we were kind of on board with that anyway. We see it as a potential positive. Actually, it is a really important part of placemaking. It has to be considered early, and it has to be considered in an integrated way. So if we can make the link with planning work, I think that's actually a really real positive. In terms of evaluation of design, I guess we were kind of thinking about that anyway as the SAB role, how they would do that. So within our context, actually, whether it's the SAB that isn't going to exist anymore or the lead local flood authority that is, yes, they're going to be commenting on design principles. We kind of know that anyway. So that didn't make a massive amount of difference. However, the funding did, and I will touch on that finally. But I guess the other thing that we're thinking about, and I don't think we've got any answers for, is in terms of identifying assets. So once you've designed sods to be part of a system, how do you know they're there? How do you make sure that you don't keep track of what's where, how you don't build on it? Can we use things like the asset register, or do we have to track it through the planning system? There's various mechanisms, but there's not a great deal of clarity on what's going to be best. Funding I've left till the last, not because it's the least of the problems, but it seems the least likely to be resolved. So I'll skate over that, I think. Having no great wisdom to impart beyond what anyone else has already mentioned. In terms of the wider issues, we've touched on the idea of the statutory weight. SuDS is now going to be a material consideration. That's really quite different from the automatic right to connect. how is that going to look in practice? And I guess that's going to be an issue for case law to determine. Rob, you said we're going to have the first few years could be telling in terms of if planning authorities turn stuff down and it goes to appeal, how's that going to be fought? Arguably removing the right to connect might have been a stronger one, but we've just got to wait and see what happens on that. And the other big question is about adoption mechanism (S). Is it better to have choice? Is it better to have certainty? I mean, the development community was certainly advocating for choice, but equally a lot of what we hear from them is they just want to know. So, yeah, will the choice be positive or negative? And how do we as a local authority, who ultimately often does end up picking up the pieces at the end of the day, work with that? The government guidance seems at the moment to be preferring conditions over commuted sums, which is an interesting one because commuted sum, at least you've got the money in the bank, that does give you some kind of control. Conditions can be quite difficult and expensive to enforce. So, yeah, interesting approach from government there. I guess it will be down to local authorities as to what approach they choose. But I mean, yes, there are lots of challenges, but it's not all doom and gloom. There are opportunities, and I think that's why we're all interested in SuDS, because actually they do provide such a fantastic opportunity to deliver things that we're all looking for. So the standard thing is, how can we do that? Well, from my point of view, I think a lot of it is be positive in terms of conversations. So that dialogue with planning colleagues, both the policy makers but also the development management teams. How can you work with them? How can they be supported? What do they need? The principles are basically the same. In discussion with developers, what are they expecting? What do they need? What do they want in order to plan SuDS in from the start? But also wider stakeholders, the IDBs, the water companies, the Environment Agency, just understanding what roles they'll play. So I think a lot of how we maximise the opportunities is just to keep the dialogue open, keep talking to partners. And I think that really underpins our approach. It's been a consultative one. It's been very much shaped by its partners. I think sitting SuDS together with planning does offer opportunities in terms of developing that early joined-up approach. And hopefully the example that I've taken of what we've done in Central Bedfordshire, it's not perfect. Sadly, we didn't have a crystal ball when we sat down and scoped this out, but I think it kind of has a good feel for the general trend in terms of the direction the government's taking. And I think it puts us in a strong place to promote effective SuDS and multiple benefits. So hopefully it's been a useful overview of an example of a local authority's thinking. If you want to check out the guidance, it is online. I hope the slides will be circulated because I don't fancy anyone's chances of writing that down accurately. Or do email me if you've got any questions. That one's more simple, laura.kitson@centralbedfordshire.gov.uk. But yeah, thank you for your attention and for the chance to chat through ideas. It's been really interesting hearing the other speakers as well. We've got a way to go on this, but it's useful to share thoughts and experiences. So thank you very much.
Thank you for the journey.